Hey guys, welcome to our fourth video on Greek civilization. So what we're doing is really making our way through ancient Greece, looking at their parts of their different cultures, starting with religion that we talked about, their epics and dramas. In the last video, we looked at this idea of drama, the first plays. We mentioned that there were two types of dramas, comedies and tragedies. And then we looked at four dramatists who were very prominent in ancient Greece. And then where we left off in our last video was really on this slide, and we were looking at the architecture of ancient Greece, specifically during the Golden Age. And we called that architecture the classical Greek architecture. We said that we see many examples of this in our country today, especially the White House and our Capitol buildings all have that classical Greek characteristic of the large pillars in the front. Oftentimes they're in white, and so on. So it's just looking very beautiful, and we still have those pieces of ancient Greece in our modern day culture. Today what we're going to look at is a different field of ancient Greece known as philosophy. And from philosophy we move on to history, and from history to science. Because what we're going to notice about the ancient Greece is that they really started a lot of the things that we use today in the United States. Okay, so if we look at Greek culture, and we're specifically going to look at the Greek thinkers. Greek thinkers, if we remember back to our last unit, are known as philosophers. So a lot of philosophers started to become very prominent during ancient Greece. Okay, so if we look at the Greeks, and we focus a lot on Athens because Athens was that school of education which really promoted that free thinking. Okay, they believe that the human mind was really capable, of understanding. So it's not that they're just going to go through life believing that this is what they have. They're going to seek purpose. Why are things the way they are? And that's when this idea of philosophy really came about. Okay, so these Greek thinkers, these philosophers in ancient times are really going to have the wisdom and the education to look big picture, develop things that might help mankind, not just Athens and not just Greece, but really how can we really affect the world with some of these concepts. Okay, so if we look at the word philosophy, it's a Greek word that means the love of wisdom. These people seek education, answers, and so on. Okay, philosophy really helped develop the other subject areas that we learn about, like history and science, biology, logic, the study of reasoning, and so forth, to ask those questions like, why is this happening? Okay, those why questions is really what those philosophers focused on. So the first group of philosophers that we're going to talk about are known as the Sophists. All right, these philosophers traveled around as a group from one polis to the next polis, and they would actually teach a lot of subjects, math, science, history, and so on. All right, they're best known for their rhetoric. Okay, so they would go around and teach rhetoric. Rhetoric is not something that a lot of students know. They don't know this phrase, but actually we use it a lot. All right, so rhetoric is simply the art of public speaking and debate. So they're going to teach people how to speak publicly well, okay, because there's always a good and a bad. They're also going to teach people how to debate. Okay, we could all sit down and think debate is arguing, but debate is a skill, all right, and in order to get your point across, you have to be able to state your opinion in a way that comes across as educated, so the other side of that can respond or not respond. Okay, so the Sophists are going to go around and teach this. Now, the one thing that made the Sophists somewhat unpopular amongst the polises was this idea about the gods. Okay, so human beings in Greece believed that the gods, they sought their life to please the gods, and the gods would cast wrath, and everything in this polis would happen because the god was either unhappy or happy. And the Sophists are going to say, well, that doesn't make any sense. All right, they're going to say that gods do not influence human actions. So yes, we have these gods with these beliefs, all right, but the gods aren't going to, make a person do certain things. That just doesn't happen. Now, remember, if you think about people, if most people believe in one thing, and then another group who's smaller comes along and says, well, that's not true, all right, people aren't going to look very highly upon them. Okay, they're not going to be super popular. Okay, so Sophists believe that the way of life for people is going to be different because people are different. We can understand that. All right, so something that I do, which is really good for me, might be completely wrong for you. All right, in ancient Greeks' time, a lot of people didn't go with that idea. They believed, in that common thing that if we all did this, that life would be better. All right, and the Sophists are going to challenge that idea. Okay, so again, they were criticized because a lot of people felt that they taught the wrong lesson. Now, other people argued that the Sophists created this knowledge or misleading knowledge that students should actually win arguments rather than seek truth. Okay, so that was just something that people criticized the Sophists for. Okay, now another philosopher comes along, and it's the man in this picture, and his name was Socrates. So if we look at Socrates, Socrates was actually a sculptor. That was his job, but he loved this idea of philosophy, this thinking big picture and answering those why questions. So Socrates lived in Athens. He didn't write down any of his beliefs, so he didn't create any written works or any books, right? But instead, what we have about Socrates developed from the writings that were done by his students. So Socrates would go out and he would speak. Okay, and he's going to end up with a gathering. People are going to follow his teachings. They're going to believe in what he said. And then he gains these students, and the students are going to start writing down these teachings, and that's why we have these documents that point to what Socrates actually did. Okay, so Socrates was a critic of the Sophists. He believed in absolute truth. He looked at all people and believed that knowledge existed in all human beings. It wasn't given to you by the gods. It wasn't given to you because you were powerful or wealthy. All people had this knowledge within them. Okay, and what he's going to do, he's going to create this new type of questioning, and we call this the Socratic method. Now, if we look at the Socratic method, I know in English, in the advanced English, they just use the Socratic method in their classroom. This is something that teachers use and students use, so it still is very, very current in our world today. So what the Socratic method says, it's not really a lecturing of sorts, but it's rather like asking a very pointed question. And then you allow students to think about it for a while. And then once they come up with their own opinion, we share it. Okay, and what we're going to notice that these opinions are going to be different. Okay, and from those differences, then we can start a conversation or a debate to figure out which side is more accurate. So not that the opinion is wrong, but rather who was able to prove their opinion better. Okay, so people have opinions all the time. It's not that you're proving them wrong, it's just who can prove their side more. Okay, so during this time, leaders really thought the Socratic method was very dangerous. Remember, we're living in a time where Greece was against Persia and they almost lost. Okay, and then we're going to be in a time where one city-state is against another city-state. So the leaders are going to be very sketchy on the Socratic method because they really believe that with these skills that people would begin to question the leader. Okay, and if you question the leader, there's always a possibility of revolt and rebellion. Now we know that in Athens, they actually encouraged people to voice their opinions. People went to the Agora to have these debates. Okay, but after they lost the Peloponnesian War to Sparta, even Athens restricted this right and said you can't. Okay, we can't do that. It just causes more rebellion and revolt and so forth. Now Socrates lived in Athens, and he's going to say, well, I realize this, but I'm going to continue to teach what I believe in, okay, despite what the leaders said. Now this is going to get Socrates in a little bit of danger. Okay, so Socrates still went around teaching to his students, and the city leaders are going to begin to fear his influence. They know he has students and so forth. So what they decided to do, they arrested Socrates. Now this is the interesting part. So they charged him with a crime, and the crime that Socrates was charged with was charging him to urge young people to rebel against the government. So now we have to think back. Did he urge young people to rebel? Not really. All he did was teach young people how to ask pointed questions. Okay, he just taught them, okay, if you are questioning what's going on, ask questions. He's not telling them go out and rebel, okay, but yet that was his charge, which is somewhat sketchy. Okay, so he's going to go to trial and the jury is going to find him guilty and his sentence is to die. Now, since, we have to think this whole thing doesn't make a whole bunch of sense, and there's obviously a lot more detail here, he was given the option of leaving Athens forever instead. So they said, you could stay in Athens and you are going to be sentenced to death. Or if you promise to leave Athens to never return, you can do that. So we would think, well, Socrates took the first, horse out of there and moved, okay? But Socrates actually very proud of his city-state, very proud to be Athenian, believing in what he was teaching, decided that he would stay in Athens because he's an Athens citizen, because he should abide by the city's laws. So if he was charged with a crime and found guilty, okay, his sentence should be to die. He shouldn't be given a different sentence just because of what he was or who he was. So in front of his students and the rest of his followers, he gave a speech stating that people should abide by Athens, that Athens was great. And then his death sentence was really to drink poison. That was the death sentence of that time. And then he died. Okay, so we might say, whew, that's different. All right, but Socrates' teachings lived on through his predecessors. So through his students, we're going to receive these big ideas. And these big ideas are going to allow for change. But we'll stop here because I know I'm at 11, and if I talk about Plato here, I think it'll take us to 13. So we'll just do that in the next video.